Cynthia Poon. Cynthia is a research associate of our center. She received her PhD in comparative literature from the University of Michigan. Her research interests are in communication of differences and reconciliation, the Church in China, and the practice of spiritual and ecological sustainability. Dr. Poon, please.
So a warm welcome to everyone, participants really from all over the world. So I will be moderating this panel this afternoon. Jesus Christ told his disciples, put out into deep water, and the disciples did go far, all the way to the Far East. But in so doing, they had to navigate wars in Europe, colonial hubris, domestic policies that are sometimes friendly, sometimes not, and also very much rivalries within the church, rivalries between different groups of missionaries. So as Cardinal Tagley reminded us just now, we do not evangelize in a vacuum. So how can the church as an institution and as people engage with the world to share the gospel? What lessons can we draw from the experiences in some of the Asian churches? And what may give us hope today? We are very honored to have three panelists, very well versed in their nation's encounters with the gospel. They will be sharing with us today the history of the church in Korea, Japan, and Indonesia. First, to take care of some of the arrangements first. So each panelist will speak for 30 minutes, and I will be reminding the speakers 5 minutes before the time is up. After the three speakers, we'll move to the Q&A session, which will be for 20 minutes. So I hope we have enough time, so we can take questions from the audience, as well as maybe among the panelists as well. I would like to invite the audience to write in their questions in the chat room to everyone, so everyone can see your question, and then we'll be selecting the questions from there for the Q&A. So we begin first with Father Michael Ha-Kyun Kim, who's currently doing missionary work in Alaska. He joined the Korean Missionary Society in 2002 and was ordained missionary priest in 2010. He received the Doctorate of Sacred Theology in 2016 from the Jesuit School of Theology of Santa Clara University of the United States. So may we begin first with Father Michael Kim.
Okay, thank you. All right. Can I share my PowerPoint? Okay. All right, okay. Nice to meet you all in this time. I'm so glad to share some experience of the Korean Catholic Church related to propaganda fide. As you see the title of my presentation, I'd like to share the missionary experience from the Korean Catholic Church. Okay, now let's get started. Right, here are two missionary priests. First one is Father Patrick McGlinchey, an Irish priest. When Father McGlinchey arrived in Korea in 1953, its political and economical situation in Korea was unstable, and the people of Korea was suffering greatly from poverty. So he opened a large farm, trying to encourage the people to overcome their poverty by working at the farm, as well as with efforts for the missionary activities for evangelizations. This missionary life of Father McClinch is one part of the history of the Korean Catholic Church. And second one is Father Tae-seok Lee, a Korean priest. When Father Lee was sent to South Sudan, Africa, in 2001, he saw the harsh reality of South Sudan. As a missionary priest, Father Lee made many contributions to the people of South Sudan. He dug wells to provide clean water and cultivated a field to grow crops and vegetables. Father Lee also erected a medical clinic for the poor. Father Lee's contribution to the people left a deep mark into the people of South Sudan. Through the story of the Father McClinch and the story of Father Lee, I can find a big change of the Korean Catholic Church. In other words, many foreign missionaries have worked for the Korean Catholic Church for many years. But now, the Korean Catholic Church is sending missionaries to other countries. So today, my presentation will show that the Korean Catholic Church changed from a mission receiving church to a mission sending church. And I am going to talk about the contributions of Propaganda Fide that helped the Korean Catholic Church receiving missionaries from other countries and sending missionaries to other countries. For this, we'll look over the birth and growth of the Korean Catholic Church and the birth and growth of the Korean foreign mission. Christian history in East Asia notes that the Korea was far from the activities of Western missionaries. Instead, the Korean Catholic Church was started by the efforts of the native Korean laypersons. In the 18th century, some religious texts written into Chinese language were transmitted to Korea. Some Korean scholars gleaned the essence of this new religion by reading and studying these books, and then attempted to practice it among themselves. One of the members studying these books, Seung-hoon Lee, had a chance to go to Beijing, China. So they asked him to find information on Christian teaching, to visit churches, and to take baptism. Seung-hoon Lee went to Beijing, and after being instructed, he was baptized by a French Jesuit priest in 1784. This picture shows the baptism of Seung-hoon Lee. This baptism has been considered as the starting point of the Catholic Church in Korea. After he came back to Korea, Seung-hoon Lee was selected as the chief of the church, and his lay organization decided to bestow upon him the authority to supervise the celebration of masses baptism, and confirmations. And he granted similar authority to 10 of his colleagues, giving them the title of a priest. Sung-hun-yi and the 10 others began to act as priests, administering sacraments, teaching, and performing other priest roles. The Christian community developed rapidly thanks to their dedication to the mission under lay leadership. However, they came to know that they need ordained priests to perform sacraments by the church law. So they contacted Beijing and asked a missionary priest for the Korean church. In response to the Korean church's continued requests for a priest, Bishop Gueva in Beijing dispatched a Chinese priest. His name is Father Wenmo Chu. Father Chu entered Korea in 1794 and became the first missionary priest to enter Korea. Father Chu performed the holy offices very secretly and very successfully, but he died by beheading in 1801 by the persecutions in Korea society. In 6 years of the 6 years missionary dedication, the number of Korean Catholics grew from 4,000 to 10,000. After Father Chu's death, there were no other missionaries to Korea for many years due to the severe persecutions. The Korean believers endured the persecutions and began to campaign for another priest to celebrate the sacraments for them. In 1811, they wrote a letter to Rome, but there was no progress. So they sent another letter to Rome in 1825. In this letter, they stated that all priests must be sent to oversee their difficult situation. The one who showed the greatest enthusiasm toward the mission in Korea was Cardinal Bartolomeo Capellari of Propaganda Fide. Fortunately, in the midst of promoting a missionary dispatch to Korea, Cardinal Capellari was elected to the Holy See and acceded as a Gregory XVI in 1831. Finally, Propaganda Fide wrote to Paris Foreign Mission Society to ask if they could accept the charge of supplying priests to Korea for the immediate future. So Bishop Bartholomew Briguier, a French missionary from MEP, who was pursuing missionary work in Thailand, was the first to make the attempt. He knew of the Korean believers' request for a priest, and he volunteered to become the missionary in Korea, even though he was well aware of the persecutions of the church in Korea. With these events, Pope Gregory XVI erected the Vicariate Apostolic of Korea on September 1831 and appointed Bishop Briguier as the first apostolic vicar of Korea. Propaganda Fide opened the door for mission to Korea, and Paris Mission Society became the first Western missionaries to enter Korea. The French missionaries helped revitalize the Korean Catholic Church from the persecutions, and the number of the church members steadily increased. Subsequently, the Catholic Foreign Mission Society of America, we call them Marino, sent missionary priests to Korea beginning in 1923. And the Missionary Society of Saint Columban sent missionary priests to Korea in 1933. Father Patrick McClinchy, who I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, was a member of the Missionary Society of Saint Columban. By 1950, there were also 2 men's and 5 women's religious communities who were invited to help with the pastoral work in Korea. After Second World War and the Korean War, there was an increased need for priests and religious workers in Korea. With the help of foreign missionaries, the Catholic Church in South Korea recovered from the war. For example, the Society of Jesus, Jesuits, was the first Catholic missionary community in Korea devoted primarily to higher education, having been invited by the Korean Catholic Church for the specific purpose. At the same time, the Korean Catholic Church received another resource for its development with the arrival of the Society of St. Paul. So the church published and distributed written material promoting Catholic beliefs and values. In addition to missionary groups focused on education and the propagation of faith through the printed word, there were also groups dedicated to medical missionary work. With their help and missionary work, the Korean Catholic Church grew and the number increased. Finally, on March 10, 1962, Pope John XXIII established the local hierarchy of the church in Korea and assigned a Korean bishop, Suwan Kim, as cardinal. A Korean historian, Professor Kwang Jo, saw this as a symbolic event that the leadership in the Korean Catholic Church was transferred to Koreans. So Professor Cho describes its Koreanization. Soon, there were considerable changes in the number of Korean priests, monks, and religious sisters, so that the Korean Catholic Church showed a high rate of increase in vocations. This table shows the change of the number of priests in Korea and how much the number of Korean priests has been increasing. In the 1970s, the number of foreign priests in Korea began to shrink dramatically, while the number of Korean priests is growing continuously. This increasing vocations was the basement of the Korean Catholic foreign mission to other countries. Okay, now let's talk about the Korean Catholic foreign mission to other countries. Even though the Korean Catholic Church had received the many missionaries from other countries over the years, the Korean Catholic Church has also recently begun to send Korean missionaries to other countries. It is changing from being a receiving church to being a sharing church. The beginnings of the Korean Catholic missionary movement go back to the year of 1975. At the time, with the acceptance of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Korea, Bishop Jae Choi founded the Korean Missionary Society, KMS, in order to participate in world mission by sending Korean missionary priests to other countries. KMS became the first foreign missionary society in the Korean Catholic Church. Bishop Jae Choi was the first bishop of Busan Diocese in Korea. As a decisive church leader who laid the foundations of the Diocese of Busan, Bishop Choi resigned in 1973 at the age of 61. After his resignation, he moved to Germany and remained there for 18 months, during which the time Cardinal Angelo Rossi, prefect of the Propaganda Fide, suggested that some office at the national level be given to Bishop Choi. After receiving a suggestion from the Propaganda Fide regarding Bishop Choi, the Korean Church assigned Bishop Choi in charge of the national office of the Pontifical Missionary in Korea. With this assignment, Bishop Choi began to concentrate on church mission and the problem of the rapid decrease of vocations and the lack of the priests in the universal church. Bishop Choi remembered foreign missionaries from other countries had provided great material support, sacrifices, so that the Korean church benefited from newly built parishes and social programs, etc. As such, he concluded the Korean priests could help the universal church and recompense the assistance the Korean church had received from foreign churches. Bishop Choi understood the church's missionary character and the responsibility of particular churches to preach the gospel to the whole world. He believed that the training of the missionary priest was a duty of the Korean Catholic Church, and the establishment of a Korean Missionary Society was the God's plan to meet the signs of the times. With this purpose, Bishop Choi suggested to the Korean bishops that he found the Korean Missionary Society and he requested their support. Meanwhile, he contacted the Propaganda Fide to explain the imminent need for foreign mission society in Korea and requested the help of the Propaganda Fide. So Cardinal Angelo Rossi prefect of Propaganda Fide, expressed their thanks for Bishop Choi's missionary zeal, and he promised Bishop Choi effective and appropriate help. And Cardinal Rossi advised Bishop Choi that this project of founding new missionary society be studied with the utmost care regarding all possible implications, including the campaign of the publicity given to Korean Catholics by the media and magazines, and the reaction and cooperation of the clergy and layperson, and the union with the Catholic bishops of Conference Korea, which must be always be kept informed of all the initiatives taken, and the circumspection building upon a solid foundation for the future missionary activity. Encouraged by the agreement of Korean bishops and the Propaganda Fide, Bishop Choi began his founding work of a new missionary society, and finally, the Korean Missionary Society was founded in 1975. That was the beginning of a Korean Catholic foreign mission, and it is continuing right now. So this chart shows the increasing number of Korean Catholic missionaries. The Korean Catholic Church dispatched 4 missionaries to Papua New Guinea in 1981. That's the beginning of a Korean Catholic foreign mission. And the number is continuously increased. So in 2020, the Korean Church had 1,137 missionaries working in 80 countries.
Father Kim, if I may interrupt briefly, you have 5 minutes left.
All right, thank you. On October 1981, Catholic Times reported the Korean Catholic Church also sends missionaries to other countries. For the first time in 200 years of the Korean Church history, 4 priests are being sent to Papua New Guinea. So that this dispatch will become a watershed event. The article evaluated this dispatch as an important moment when the Korean Catholic Church changed from a receiving church to a giving church. The founding of the Korean Missionary Society catalyzed foreign mission for the Korean Church and encouraged bishops, priests, and religious to share their gifts from God with other countries and churches. The Propaganda Fide praised the great efforts of Bishop Choi, stating that the establishment of a KMS would make the Korean Catholic mature and strong. In trying to establish KMS, Bishop Choi acknowledged that the Korean Catholic Church was likely not mature enough to send missionaries to other countries, but he also believed that the Korean Catholic Church needed to share. So he asserted that the Korean Catholic Church should change from the church receiving help to a church giving help. It reminds us that Pope John Paul II stated that faith is strengthened when it is given to others. It is in commitment to the church's universal mission that the new evangelization of the Christian peoples will find inspiration and support. Bishop Choi's foresight has manifested now for some decades. Many dioceses in Korea and religious orders now send missionaries to other countries. As the missionary zeal and practice of the Korean church is rapidly spreading, the Korean church endeavors to improve their work of evangelization by sharing missionary information and visions. So, Catholic Church in Korea founded the Committee of the Missions and Pastoral Care of the Overseas to manage all missionary agencies from the Korean Church. And the Korean Church began to celebrate an annual day of Korean mission abroad. Father Yongjae Andrew Kim, former Superior General of KMS, explains that this event highlights the consideration that foreign mission is not a commitment for a specific person or institute for all the Korean churches. And the Korean Catholic Church has 3 regional associations: the Amical, the gathering for the Korean missionaries in Latin America; KAM, K-A-M, is gathering for African missionaries in Korea; and Pajonghwae is a gathering of missionaries in China. Pajong means seeding, and Hue means the gathering. All right, here is my conclusion. World mission or foreign mission is helping the Korean Catholic Church become not only a local church, but also a missionary church. In its beginning, the Korean Church accepted the faith spontaneously, but invited missionary priests to build up the church and collaborated with the foreign missionaries. In the response of Korean believers' requests, Propaganda Fide sent foreign missionaries to Korea and opened the beginning of the Korean Catholic Church. And many missionaries' orders helped the growth of the Korean Church in various ways. Even foreign missionary outreach to Korea laid the groundwork for the international mission of the Korean Catholic Church. World mission is the task for all churches, not just Western ones. A Korean bishop, Jason Choi, founded KMS as the first native mission institute to specialize in overseas mission and encouraged the Korean believers to participate in world evangelization. Propaganda Fide gave Bishop Choi the opportunity to think about overseas mission from the Korean Catholic Church and helped Bishop Choi open the beginning of the Korean Catholic foreign missions to other countries. Now, the Korean Catholic Church becomes conscious of the shift from the being a receiving church to becoming a sharing church to contribute the growth of the world Christianity. From mission to mission, it is a missionary experience of a Korean Catholic Church. All right, thank you for your patience to my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Kim. Yeah. Thank you for sharing with us the history and the story of a very unique church. I think as Cardinal Tagle was saying, every baptized person is a missionary. And I think the Korean church from its inception to now has always been one of taking full initiative. So it's very admirable. And I think we can all learn from that. So we move on now to the second presenter today, Mr. Kisaki, Mr. Takayoshi Kisaki. He's a member of the research team Vatican and Japan, the 100-year project, which is funded by the Kadokawa Culture Promotion Foundation. His recent focus is on Dominican Jesuit disputes over the vineyards of Japan. His publications include Returned Missionaries and the records related to the martyrs' activities of Jesuit provincial procurators. This was published in Journal of Historical Studies in Japan. And he currently teaches at the University of Tokyo and Kanto Gakuen University. So it's our pleasure to welcome you, Mr. Kisaki, to share with us about the history of the church, early history of the church in Japan. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Takayoshi Kisaki. First of all, I'd like to thank all of staff of this international symposium to invite me. Now I'm staying in Oita City. The Jesuit missionaries actively propagated Christianity under the support of the famous Christian local lord, Otomasorin, Don Francisco of Bungo. The Jesuit finally, the Jesuit finally created the first bishopric of Japan at the end of the 16th century in the city of Funai of Bungo province. In this presentation, I would like to share with you historical overview of Padroado propaganda entanglements at the end of the Christian century in Japan, which was also an important background to the Jesuit visitor Antonio Rubino's mission in 1642. I'm sending the appendix 5 now, so please take a look for your reference. Now I start my presentation. This year, 2022 marks the 400th anniversary of the establishment of the Sacred Congregation for the Propaganda Fide in the Catholic Church. People in the Far East aware of this. At least in Japan, the Propaganda Fide's establishment is not as well known as the Great Genna martyrdom or the canonization of Francis Xavier and Ignatius of Loyola by Pope Gregory XV, all of which happened in the same year. The achievement of Xavier, the first Christian to land in the introduced Christianity to the country, are covered in school history education in Japan, and his name is known to everyone. The same is true of the various cases of persecution and martyrdom during Christianity's prohibition, especially the Great Genna martyrdom. In contrast, the Propaganda Fide is just one organization of the Catholic Church, and it is safe to say that in Japan, only Catholics and historians of Catholicism know its name. However, the various reforms in the Roman Curia, including the establishment of the Propaganda Fide, had a short, medium, and long-term effects on Catholic missionary work in the country. The presentation will consist of 3 sections. First, I will review the funding aims and functions of the Propaganda Fide, as well as examining the negotiation in which it was involved. Then I will introduce cases that arose in Japan due to the Propaganda Fide's reforms. The trip to Japan by the Jesuit visitor Antonio Rubino can be regarded as one such example. Finally, I will touch on the diocesan re-establishment when missionary work began in Japan during the Meiji period. Through this presentation, we will be able to see that the Propaganda Fide's establishment, which at first glance might seem to have no connection with Japan, was in fact closely related to Japanese history from the early modern period onward. Section 1. It's the establishment of the Propaganda Fide and Japan around 1622. workers in the vineyard of Japan. In 1549, Xavier, the apostolic nuncio in the East, took his first steps on Japan after taking an eastward route through the Portuguese state of India. The path he followed from Europe to the Far East was later developed by Luis Freud, Francis Cabral, the visitor missions, Alessandro Barignano. These missionaries were initially Portuguese-sponsored Jesuits. However, in later years, a succession of Franciscan, Dominican, and other mendicant orders came to Japan via a westbound route through the Spanish territory of New Spain. Due to their different missionary approaches, the conflict over missionary rights, which was connected to the right of patronage of the Portuguese and Spanish kings, royal families, Padroado and Patronato, respectively, intensified. In 1585, when the Japanese Tensho Embassy arrived in Rome, Gregory XIII issued a paper brief, which restricted the route of entry into Japan, and those who could engage in missionary work there. This Jesuit-friendly arrangement was gradually adjusted in briefs issued by Sixto V, Clement, and Paul V. During this time, in 1587, Toyotomi Hideyoshi issued an edict banishing Catholic priests from Japan, Batren Hore. And in 1597, 26 Catholics were martyred in Nagasaki. In 1640, the early Edo Tokugawa period, nationwide bans on Christianity were enforced. The Jesuits believed that the mendicant order's open proselytizing was the cause of persecution by the Tokugawa shogunate. For example, Pedro Morejon, a Spanish Jesuit, traveled to Europe after his expulsion to Manila from Japan, continued to object to lifting the above-mentioned rules established by successive popes. The Franciscan Luis Sotelo, who played a leading role in accompanied the Keicho embassy, negotiated with the Roman Curia to divide Japan's diocese into East and West ones, and to appoint himself as the bishop of Northern Japan. Until then, bishops of the Japan mission had been appointed exclusively from the Jesuit order, and the diocesan management had been favorable for Jesuits. Luis Sotelo sought to rectify this situation. Although the Pope showed a degree of understanding, this would have been a violation of the right to recommend the bishops of Spain's King Philip III, and in the end, it was not approved by the Spanish royal court, which had become aware of the intense repression of Christianity in Japan. In this way, Sotelo's attempt came to nothing. The centralization of the Roman Curias, the propaganda Fide's establishment and Japanese diocese. Let us overview the circumstances of the propaganda Fide's founding. This organization was first mentioned in writing on 6 January 1622, had its first meeting on 15 January, and was officially established on 22 June of the same year by Gregory XV. Initially, this organization consisted of 13 cardinals, 2 high-ranking clergymen, and a secretary, Francesco Imboli, and met once a month in the Pope's presence and twice at the private residence of the oldest cardinal. This institution was tasked with overseeing mission to pagans and heretical lands where dioceses were not established. This was a reflection of the resolution of the Council of Trent that bishops and other clergy should reside locally. The institution's responsibilities naturally rivaled both Iberian countries' right of patronage. In later years, the Propaganda Fide sent vicar apostolics in place of usual bishops to non-Christian areas and tried to organize these areas as missionaries fields under the direct jurisdiction of the Roman Curia. As mentioned earlier, in the late 16th century, Jesuit and mendicant orders came to Japan, and Christians were in conflict over missionary approaches. On the other hand, as the number of Christians gradually increased, there was a parallel movement to establish a permanent bishopric in the Catholic hierarchy. After Pedro Martins, in this screen, Japanese fourth bishop and the first to came to the country until the consummation of Japan's Sakoku policy. Japan's diocese was headed by the Jesuit Luis de Cerqueira, the fifth bishop, and Diogo Valente, the sixth. Bishops were indispensable to the Christian community in Japan because, needless to state, only bishops are allowed to confer sacraments and ordain priests, and there was a shortage of priests in the country, especially at the time of persecution. From this historical background, Japan was perhaps the relative impact of the establishment of the Propaganda Fide on Japan was on missionaries from the Catholic orders heading to Japan. They began to feel more that even non-Jesuit could be ordained as bishop. The two procuradores. In this part, let us look at the global and multifaceted activities of two Iberian priests, who immediately after the establishment of the Propaganda Fide devoted themselves to securing missionary rights in Japan as the province procurators of their respective orders. In order to appeal to the lobby religious and secular institutions and acquire support in the form of the money and personnel, both the Jesuits and Dominicans sent to Rome veteran priests. They had held senior positions in missionary areas far from Europe. As part of these activities, experienced and well-informed procurators put together publications. The Dominican Diego Collado, a native of Miyahata, Spain, arrived in Manila in 1611 and landed in Japan, when Christianity had already been banned. Later, in 1622, he witnessed his fellow Dominican Luis Flores' execution and Great Genna martyrdom in Nagasaki, and then returned to Europe to bring back a report recording the martyrdom of 26 Catholics in 1597. From 1623 onwards in Rome, Madrid, and other cities, he took a firm stand against the Jesuits. During this time, with the permission of the Pope and the Propaganda Fide, he published several books. At the beginning, Diego Collado returned to Manila again in 1635 and founded the Congregation of San Pablo, which was directly under the Roman Curia and also was in conflict with local Dominicans. He ultimately died in a maritime accident after leaving Manila for Japan. Another energetic procurator was the Portuguese Jesuit Sebastian Vieira. After about 20 years of missionary service in Japan, he was elected in Macau as the procurator of the province in 1623, and after traveling to Lisbon and Madrid, entered Rome in May 1625. Until he left for the Far East again in September 1629, he submitted a letter of thanks from Japan's believers to the Pope and worked hard to contain Korea's efforts by directly sending reports on them to the Jesuit headquarters. He landed again in Japan and was martyred in 1634 in the city of Edo Castle, the shogun's capital. Representing their respective orders, Collard and Vieira sought to have the Roman Curia recognize their own order's missionary rights in Japan. Collard repeatedly petitioned the King of Spain and also Propaganda Fide to put an end to the Jesuit monopoly of the Japan mission. Meanwhile, Vieira submitted reports to the Jesuit headquarters and also presented Pope's letter to thanks from Japan's believers. According to Pedot's research, a total of 11 resolutions were issued in Rome and Madrid between 1625 and 1628. The 6th point is on the screen. Debates occurred as a propaganda fide in Rome and the Council of the Indies. In the end, no conclusion was reached. One resolution would be passed, and while the parties fought over its execution, another one would be passed, and so on. Another 5 years elapsed before the Roman Curias decided on its plan. Although the tentative solution was finally reached under Pope Urban VIII, she treated the encyclical as having no meaning for Japan. Issues 2 and 3 as above will be received in the second part of this paper. Collard submitted the propaganda fide the diocese division proposal of Sotero here. And Collard was his senior, Sotero was his Collard's senior mendicant friar, and then created a list of mendicant friar candidates. The internal logic of the propaganda fide and the first secretary, Francesco Ingori, had an affinity with the assertion of Collard in the sense that it sought to stop the Jesuit monopoly for the Japanese mission. However, the assertion of the Jesuit at the same time could not be ignored. Section 2, Diogo Valente, the last bishop of Japan. Against his backdrop, Diogo Valente was ordained bishop in 1618 to replace Luis Cerqueira. He had died in Japan in 1614. Valente tried to stop Sotero, who had returned to Madrid, from going to Japan, but he himself was also intercepted by city officials when he attempted to leave Macau for Japan. There were probably concerns about trade and persecution intensifying. His trip was even opposed by Jesuits in Macau. Therefore, in 1623, he decided there would be 2 bishopric governors for Japan, with the Jesuit superior for Japan at the time serving southern Japan, De Angeles, and later Boldrino serving northern Japan. Later, Cristoban de Ferreira, famous as a model for Endo Shusak's Chinmoku, silence, became the Jesuit and governor of the bishopric of Japan. Meanwhile, the position of Macau bishop was also vacant and filled locum tenens by the governor of the bishopric of Macau, Antonio de Rosario. Valente had been appointed bishop of Macau by the Portuguese king because he could not travel to Japan, but the bishop of the Cochin diocese in India rejected this. Subsequently, he became involved in a dispute over the Macau diocese with Rosario, and he was summoned to Goa from 1624 to 1630. The Vatican considered it problematic that Valente did not go to Japan, while he was assigned and repeatedly requested that he travel to Japan. In Rome, Sebastian Vieira defended Valente. Valente himself was willing to go to Japan and was pursuing to exile from Japan in Macau. He died in Macau in 1633, having failed to fulfill his wish to go to Japan. Although a bit later, Portugal's Bragança dynasty gained independence from Spain in 1640. However, the Roman Curia, valuing its relationship with Spain, did not recognize Portugal's independence and therefore did not order the bishop candidates nominated by the Portuguese king. Therefore, Diogo Luiz, who was appointed by the king as a candidate for Japanese bishop after Portugal had once again become independent. But he was only an elected bishop, obispo electo. Furthermore, from the 1670s onward, after the Roman Curia recognized Portugal's independence, the Curia adopted the policy that Quadrado resident bishops appointed by the king shall be limited to exercising jurisdiction in the territories currently under the control of the Portuguese crown, and that the missionary land in Portugal's sphere of conquest, conquista, not currently under Portuguese control, shall be entrusted to vicar apostolic sent by the propaganda fide. The bishop Valente's non-entry to Japan meant that Japan was an area not under the king's rule. This was a turning point. The Roman Curia moved toward not recognizing Portugal's right to patronage. Bishops appointed and sent by the propaganda fides. After Vieira's departure from Roma, only Collard was involved with the propaganda fide. During this time, Collard repeatedly petitioned both the King of Spain and propaganda fide to be allowed to take charge of the Japanese mission. And he also submitted to letter a list of bishop candidates from the mendicant orders. In September 1632, the propaganda fide passed various resolutions of the seventh in particularly important. It mentioned that Valente must settle in Japan, the dispatch of another bishop, and the threat of the bishop's appointment being rejected by the King of Spain. It suggests that perhaps from the shogunate perspective, Catholic priests are linked to invasion by Spain, as well as the Pope's right to ordain bishops. In other words, it's also thought that a titular bishop sent by the Pope against or in disregard of the Spanish king's wishes would reduce the shogunate's suspicion of the Catholic Church. In any case, the appointed titular bishop was supposed to go to Japan via Persia and has the right to appoint an archbishop or bishop person he deems suitable, confer sacraments such as a confirmation, ordain local priest, and so on. In 1633, as a result of Collard's request, it was decided to send a papal vicar general to the newly established diocese via India. On 22 February, the papal bull authorized the receiving of sacraments from any priest, which originally could only be conferred by a bishop, and assigned the title of papal vicar general to Japan's bishop. However, when Collard left Rome, Ingoli ultimately chose Agostino de las Llagas, who was not on Collard's list. In the end, Collard's wish that Franciscan Pedro de la Concepción and Agustinian Pedro de la Madre de Dios would be appointed did not realize, and Ingoli ordered the Portuguese priest Llagas as bishop. The King of Spain was opposed to the dispatch of the above priest. was being disrespected by the our mentioned paper book. Therefore, he advised Koreado, who was in Madrid at the time, that they should go to India by an inland route. In 1635, Llagas and Castro Majaro respectively became titular Archbishop of Mura and Bishop in Partibus Infidelium. Then, after Llagas passed away due to illness in 1637, Francesco Antonio di San Felice of Frascella took over to become the titular Archbishop of Mura, and Matteo de Colos Castro Majaro, a native of Goa, India, was assigned the title of Bishop of Cristofori. They headed to Goa via Persia, separately because they were in conflict. However, neither went to Japan from there. It is worth nothing that Castro Majaro became the first vicar apostolic in Asia as a friar, who was a local under the direct jurisdiction of the Roman Curia. This was an arrangement that Ingori and others in the Propaganda Fide had viewed as an idea.
Sorry,
sorry.
Mr. Kisaki, you have 5 minutes left.
Okay. So now I'm entering the third part section. There were several milestones in the process that led to Japan's Sakoku policy, including the 1639 edict trade with Europeans, the apostasy of Christian Federa, and now Antonio Rubino. The circumstance of each of these missions dispatch are detailed in Japanese historians. There were ventures for the personal case of Japanese believers at the time when it had become difficult for the Catholic missionary to enter Japan. In Macau, Rubino initially was against to Jesuit travel to Japan because the city authorities were eager to continue trade with Japan, and it was difficult to carry out missionary work there. But Rubino changed his missionary approach. Shimizu examines the reason for this in detail. Rubino also has a sense of rivalry with the mendicant orders. I do not deny these points, but I'd like to emphasize that the reason of Rubino's impatience was not the action of the mendicant friars who had already gone to Japan from the Philippine Islands, but rather the plan for a Franciscan archbishop sent from Roma to go to Japan. This is because, as I have already argued, Francesco Ingori's dispatch of San Felice and Matteo de Castro Majaro to Goa to Japan was shifting from holders of the right of patronage to Propaganda Fide. So now, this is the martyrdom of Antonio Rubino and Pedro Marquez. So, furthermore, the Portuguese Jesuit Antonio Francisco Cardin, the procurator who effectively succeeded Vieira, and advised John IV, who became king after Portugal's independence, to negotiate the restoration of diplomatic relations in 1647, which resulted in the dispatch of the so-called Shoho clockships. I think that Antonio Cardin's goal was probably to resume the substantial operation of the Japanese mission under the King of Portugal's right to patronage. This is to have the Roman Curia again recognize Japan as a diocese. However, this never took place until the Meiji period. Now I'll show you the photos, all these photos. This is elected bishops. Felipe Marino, Italiano, and bishops from Paris missions. And in 1685, another Jesuit, Antoine Thomas, wanted to go to Japan. And the Maria de Guadalupe is the mother of the missionaries to Japan, not in Asia or New World. And in Meiji Japan. Sorry, now I'm concluding. I'd like to summarize the answer to the question I initially raised. First, the propaganda frigate's establishment affected Japan in the following ways. Immediately after its establishment, it served as a mediator in the conflict between the Catholic orders and the right of patronage holders in the two Iberian countries. However, due to the situation in Japan, the propaganda fide recognized Portugal's access to the country, its possession de jure. The propaganda fide no longer considers Japan part of the Padroado sphere of conquest, in which bishops and other clergy did not reside locally. Then the Roman Curia sought to re-establish dioceses in Japan, beginning with the establishment of vicar apostolics. In contrast, we could say that Portugal had effective control over China, to where missionaries continued to have access after losing access to Japan. From the mid-17th century onward, vicar apostolics were sent to Japan, and there was conflict between them and the Padroado, which was never realized in the country. In Korea, on the other hand, it seems mission work was inactive. Conversely, the following are some of the repercussions that Japan had on the propaganda fide. In Japan, missionary work by Catholic orders was successful compared to other non-European mission fields. For this reason, as mentioned above, Japan was the first country over which negotiations took place in the propaganda fide. However, Japan's special positions as a place where the right of patronage crushed also exposed a limitation of the propaganda fide. It could not intrude on the interests of the King of Spain. This limitation could bring with the propaganda fide's lack of information and awareness led the organization to again begin sending bishops affiliated with it to Japan. As a result, the titular bishops sent to Japan became the first vicar apostolics in Asia, making Japan one of the earliest experimental sites of Catholic missionaries in the world. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kisaki. I think, your presentation laid out pretty much like the different kinds of territorial contests, right? And the contests of missionary rights between different orders. In a sense, I think some of that is still relevant today. We're still dealing, or the church is dealing with power politics in many ways. It's hard to, even if we have to change our mentality, and that's precisely what we need to do, but there's still a lot of, how should I say, it's, we have to somehow carve our way through the different, spheres of influence, monopolies, if you will, a sense of distrust, I would say, of the missionary agenda, the missionary interests of the church.
Okay, maybe some accident happened. Our moderated connection is lost.
Sorry, no, I'm It's okay.
It's okay. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Kisaki. And then now is the turn to Indonesia. You know, may I introduce my good friend, classmate, Father ARMADA, you know, from Indonesia. He's a Vincentian, and he got a PhD in Gregorian University and political philosophy. But now his research interest turned to interreligious dialogue, right? And now today he will present about the missionary history in Indonesia. That would be new for us, and we hope we learn something, you know, from your presentation. Yeah, Professor ARMADA.
Thank you, Anselm Lam. May I share my presentation? Yes. Well, first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm actually not a historian by training, but I have been caught in a history of the Vincentian as well as the local history, simply because of the interest of our congregation of the mission, of the Vincentian congregation, that we would like to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the presence of the first Vincentians in Indonesia. So I got to research on these historical accounts of the mission in Indonesia. Well, I would like to focus on the history of the Catholic mission in Indonesia, dedicated for the 400th anniversary of Propaganda Fide. This is for Propaganda Fide, not Indonesia. I'm sorry. First of all, you know, Indonesia is a new name. So that means I would say that actually also the Catholic Church of Indonesia is a young church, yeah? As it happens also in other Asian countries. First of all, about the name. Indonesia is a new name. Before it was called Eastern Indies or Netherlands Indies or Oost Netherlands Indies. It is called Eastern because the Western Indies was Suriname. So this is the Eastern, so the east part of the Netherlands. But also it's called Nusantara, and the capital city was Batavia, yeah? And the name Jakarta is new. This is just a little bit a background of the language that might emerge in my a paper. And this is also something that I think we need to get to know about the population of Indonesia. So based on the religious add-on. So the population of Indonesia actually is very small for the Catholics. It's only 6.9 million, so almost 7, something like that. So it could be about 3.09 or something like that, yeah, percent of the whole population of Indonesia. But I could share that even though only 3% of the population, I think the Catholic Church are full here. So compared with the European or something, yeah. And I would say that also the how to call that, the the growth of the Catholic population is also increasing here in Indonesia. And Cardinal Tagle mentioned about that, you know, Indonesia is like Korea in some aspects of growth, because once we were receiving the evangelization from the missionaries, now we are sending missionaries. more than 1,000, I think, or even 1,500, something like that, but the number. And also, we hear there are about 3,000 seminarians, 3,000 priestly candidates. And there are about 12, let's say 12, the so-called major seminaries, or the Institute of Philosophy and Theology, something like that. So basically, we are growing. Well, about the history of the mission in Indonesia, first of all, I would like to mention about the missionary visits. Franciscan friar Matthiusi, Italian, visited several places of Indonesia. He was at that time was traveling to China, but there was no account of mission activities. So basically, the Indonesian listened to the evangelization. Actually, is just not 14th century, but in the 16th century, the Portuguese sailed east to Asia and then captured Malacca and then went to the so-called Ambon and Maluku, etc. The establishment of the Portuguese fortification is in 1515. So the Catholics then, the Catholic missionaries came to Indonesia to evangelize. And then in 1602, I would like to mention also Francis Xavier. The arrival of Francis Xavier in 1546 and 1547 in Tidore and Ternate. And it was also mentioned that Franciscus Saverius, or Francis Xavier, was successful to baptize about 2,000, something like that. But you know, after that, Ternate and Tidore were defeated by the Muslims with the help of the Dutch paramilitary of the VOC, that would be the Royal Trade Association of the Dutch. And, you know, began 1602 and 1807, that's about 200 years in Indonesia. Indonesia was dominated by the Dutch, and there was no possibility, even tiny possibility, for the Catholics to evangelize. But amazingly, there was a miracle. There were several small communities of the Catholics in Adunara, in Flores, who were somehow persistent and perseverant in the Catholic faith, despite there was no any even single missionary Catholic. This is amazing. This is one of the miracles of the history of the mission activities in Indonesia. Actually, for 200 years, no missionaries, but there were several small communities in Adunara who kept indeed the Catholic faith. And then in 1807, when the VOC was dismantled or was banned, something like that, because of the corruption, and then the Catholic mission was slowly restored. In detail, I mentioned that in my paper. It was because the Netherlands was conquered by Napoleon, and then Napoleon was in favor of the freedom of religion. So it happened also then in Indonesia. So in Indonesia should be restored the Catholicism. The story about this is something I would like to go in detail later on. So this is the historical overview that could be maybe clearer. So the first is Portuguese, under Portuguese colonialism. So this is the years in 1515 and until 1600. They occupied the Spice regions, Flores and Timor. So the Catholic missionaries then evangelized the native, the indigenous people there. And then Saint Francis Xavier came over about, I don't know, maybe a couple of months, something like that, and Tidore and Ternate. And then in 1600, the arrival of the Dutch VOC Protestant. So when the birth of the propaganda fide happened in 1622, Indonesia was actually under VOC, and there was no any possibility to have, let's say, the Catholic missionary. About 200 for 200 years. And then the VOC was replaced by the Governor General representing the Royal Kingdom of Netherlands. And that's the beginning of the restoration of the Catholic mission. And this is the crucial role of the propaganda fide, because the propaganda fide was able to negotiate with the Royal Netherlands, with the royal government of the Netherlands. And there were in 1807, there were 2 Catholic missionaries sent to Indonesia. But the 2 missionaries were sent in order to, how do you call that, to do a religious service, to be capellan, something like that, to the Catholic Dutch and the Catholic European, not to evangelize the indigenous. And this is also the thing that we have to mention about the Indonesia, that the proclamation of independence of Indonesia from Netherlands and also from the Japan, it happened in 1945. And the role of the propaganda fide was amazing, because the nuncius at that time was, what do you call that, prompt enough to recognize the independence of Indonesia. So this is also good for the Catholics, so the history of the Catholicism in Indonesia. And then in 1949, that's a fully recognition by the international countries to the sovereignty of Indonesia in the Hague Treaty. And the Vatican, once again, recognized the sovereignty of Indonesia, done by the nuncius. So that means by the propaganda fide. So this is the how to call that, the years that could help us to understand in detail about the mission in Indonesia. I would say this is the mission in the 19th century, because the beginning of the role of the propaganda fide start from this century in Indonesia. So again, in 1807, propaganda fide established the apostolic prefectorate of Batavia, and then the Monsignor Nelson was the first prefect apostolic. So this is the modest beginning of the mission in Indonesia. Actually, I have to say that when the two missionaries arrived in Indonesia, they were sent by the royal government, the Dutch, to do service again to the Dutch Catholics. But it happened something seriously in 1842. That's the erection of the Apostolic Vicariate of Batavia for the first time. And in 1845, this is the famous conflict of Monsignor Jacobus Groove and the Governor General, also Jacob Rokusen. The conflict was because of the, let's say, misunderstanding between the Vicar Apostolic, Monsignor Groove, and the Rokusen regarding the ecclesiastical power to manage, let's say, to disciplinize the priests at that time. But General Rokusen did not agree with the movement of Monsignor Groove. And it happened then, the result of this conflict was terrible, because Monsignor Groove and the priests, all missionaries, were expelled from Indonesia. So about 1 year or 2 years, and then again, Indonesia, there was no any single missionary working in Indonesia. This is actually something important, not simply because of the conflict itself, but the consequence of the conflict. The solution of the conflict then was proposed by Nuncio Ferreri, that's the Vatican nuncio in the Netherlands. He negotiated about the possibility to have again peaceful relationship between the Catholic Church and the colonial government in Indonesia. And there were the article 123, and this is the famous articles of the 1845 that guarantee the, how to call that, separation of the power between the ecclesiastical power and the colonial power. That the colonial power will not intervene the so-called ecclesiastical power. But this article also contained the restrictions to do mission for the Catholic missionaries. So actually, the mission in the 19th century indeed very difficult. But thanks to the arrival of the Jesuits upon the invitation of Monsignor Franken in 1859, the Jesuits worked hard and sent several missionaries and worked throughout Indonesia. You know, Indonesia is very big, yeah? Very fast, very long, and as well as wide. But the missionaries were only not more than 5 Jesuits at the time. So the Jesuit then traveled around Indonesia with the difficulties, but you know, it worked. I mean, this is the important thing that we need to note about the history of the mission activities in Indonesia. But in 1900, when there was, how to call that, the blessing of the Church of Saint Mary in Surabaya, which is very famous, the situation was very difficult because only 10 Javanese Catholics baptized. So about 100 years of the presence of the missionaries, in Surabaya, only 10 Javanese Catholics. So this is the situation is very difficult because of the restriction of the colonial government for the mission, Catholic mission in Indonesia in this century. And I would like to show you something. This is the how do you call it, the craft, the Jesuit Father Fanlith baptized about 170 persons in Kalibawang, Sendang Sono. This is, let's say, the beginning of the somehow like a successful mission in Indonesia. And Father Fanlith also founded the Catholic Church, which then becomes the model for doing mission in Indonesia for the other missionaries from other congregations of the mission. And let me proceed to the 20th century. This is 1913. This is the year of the so-called Nader Regeling. That means that the colonial government recognized the power, the official power of the mission territory done by other priests outside the Jesuits. So that means this is the beginning of the spread of the mission activities. And this is also the beginning of the participation of the mission in Indonesia done by other congregation, religious congregation. And in 1925, the article of 123 of 1845, which is basically the regulation of the cover of the colonial governments to the so-called mission activities, was abolished. This is also the crucial role of the propaganda fide in the name of the nuncios, or the nuncios. And because of this abolishment, then the number of the Catholics of the indigenous people in Indonesia becomes, how do you call that, grew rapidly. And as I told you, in 1945, the independence and the Hague Treaty. And then in 1961, this is the bull of Pope John 23rd, Quod Christus Adorandus, which authorized the establishment of the dioceses in Indonesia. This is the foundation of the dioceses in Indonesia. And begun that year, then, Indonesian Catholic Church become more and more independent, and then the growth of the Catholics also is increasing rapidly. And as I told you before, the how to call that, the institutionalization of the priestly formation in Indonesia has been encouraged. So there are about 12, I would say, good institution of the priestly formation in Indonesia, and one of them is I'm working in. So I'm actually also president of one of the institution for the priestly formation, and we got 500 priestly candidates here. Not the biggest one, because the biggest one belongs to the Flores. About 1,000 seminarians in Flores, in Ledalero. But we have here also the program for undergraduate and then the master program. And also we are now offering the doctorate program for the theology. So basically then, I would say that the future of the Indonesian church, of the Catholic, is indeed, I would say, bright. It's good, I mean, because of the vocation, and then because of the institutionalization of the priestly formation, as well as for the lay people, because we have here about 24 the institution for the catechesis for the lay people in Indonesia. So I would say that, in conclusion, Indonesia, I think, becomes more and more a missionary church. Thank you.
So thank you, Father ARMADA, for a very interesting presentation highlighting the history of the church in Indonesia. Actually, we have more time for discussion because Father ARMADA's presentation is shorter than expected, a little shorter than expected.
Yeah,
So
I prefer shorter. I prefer shorter. Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate that too. Yeah, so that way we can have more.
You could read also the paper if you want to go in details.
We do have one question for Father ARMADA. I see. So maybe we can start with that first. Let's see. This is a question from Oscar Kwan, and I'll just read it from the chat room. He says that he has a question or curiosity for Father ARMADA. One of the most important difficulties related to the evangelization is the language.
Yes.
And Indonesia, in contrast with, well, actually, I think in China, for instance, the language can be very diverse. But compared to some other countries where language is more, I guess, uniform. So how did the early missionaries in Indonesia who came to Indonesia overcome the difficulties reaching such a vast and diverse linguistic area besides geographical?
Thank you. You know, when Indonesia got independence in 1945, there was no Indonesian, the so-called Bahasa Indonesia. There was not yet Bahasa Indonesia. That means that, every part of the country, they spoke their own dialects, languages. And I would like to admire the perseverance of the missionaries, of the Dutch missionaries. They indeed communicated with the native, the Javanese, for instance, with their own languages. And because of this, then the missionaries, how do you call that, won the heart of the native to be evangelized a Christianity, a Catholic faith. But the question of language actually is not just the language by which we are speaking, but the question of language is also about the culture, the mentality of the way of life. So what I mean is that the Dutch missionaries, they got indeed, how to call that, a strong will to love the local cultures, the local arts, the local, how to call that, performance, something like a play, something like that, no? So they use a lot of means to introduce Christ to the people. Well, we can then call it something like inculturation or something like that. But the thing is that this is indeed the creativity, the limitless creativity of the missionaries, of the Dutch missionaries. For instance, in our own case, the congregation of the mission, the missionaries of Vincentian missionaries even built the church within the model of the Japanese culture, and now it's very famous, become like a shrine in which Catholics, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, even without any religion, they come just to sit there and to somehow reflect their own lives. This is something, they got then something like a spiritual refreshment by doing somehow like a pilgrimage to this church. Yeah. This church located in here, in Kediri, just a couple of hours from Mamaiton in Eastern Java. So I would say that the language is not just a means to talk to others, but also got a wider sense. And the missionaries, they learn a lot about this also. Thank you.
I think that's also like what Cardinal Tagle was saying about recognizing Christ in the local cultures and
Yes.
bringing the person
Exactly.
of Christ, right? The missionary work. Thank you. There's also a question for Father Kim from Professor Maynard. I don't know if he's, maybe Professor Maynard, since you're a panelist, would you like to ask the question yourself?
Yeah.
Yes, sure.
No, my.
Yes, hello to everyone. Yes, my question
Hello.
is about because I mean we know that the Korean church is historically is based on the lay people, the lay Korean. So I would like to know what is today the role of the Korean lay people in the world evangelization, and because the Father Kim has mostly introduced us about the priest, the Korean priest going to the mission. So I would like to know what is the role of the lay people. For example, the role of the first or second generation of Catholic Korean and the lay Korean in evangelizing non-ethnic Korean in the USA, for example, in Alaska or in LA or somewhere else. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your wonderful question about lay persons in Korea. Yeah, so my own concern for the further research regards lay missionaries. The lay persons played a very large role in establishing the Korean Catholic Church at the beginning time, so that the Korean Catholic Church proudly claims to be a lay-inspired church. But the portion of the lay persons in the international mission from Korean Catholic Church very small. Yeah, so as I told you, we have the 1,300 missionaries from Korean Catholic Church. There is no lay persons, but we have only short-term missions for lay persons. So they are not full-time missionaries, so we did not count at the missionaries numbers. So we needed to find a way to promote Korean Catholic lay participation within the international mission. So in order to cherish the tradition of the Korean Catholic Church. And in Alaska, we have only 3 priest missionaries from Korea, no lay person to evangelize the Alaskan people. In Hong Kong, we have 5 missionaries. They are all priests. Yeah, from our community, yeah, Korean Mission Society. So we have 5 missionary priests in Hong Kong, but the lay persons only participate in the short term. So we did not count the number. So we need to promote lay persons to participate in the mission. But the lay persons support the missionary priests or religious orders. For example, in Cambodia, we have the vocational school So there, we needed the volunteers to teach haircuts and repairing bicycle or motors, even making the clothes. So some Korean laypersons go to the Cambodia to teach them very short time in the short terms. So the laypersons is only role for supportive role for the missionary priest. And so we need more the research and the promotion. Right. Thank you.
Thank you for both the question and the answer. I also see a question from Mr. Kisaki. And again, since you're a panelist, would you like to ask the question yourself?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'd like to ask further Kim about the Catholic Church hierarchy of Korea. You mentioned in your presentation the Fray Choi, I don't remember, took a vital role in the propaganda Fide. So I'd like to know whether all bishops in Korea are dispatched by the propaganda Fide or not.
The Bishop Choi is one of the Korean bishops. The propaganda Fide just helped the Bishop Choi to establish the missionary society.
So bishopric or diocese in Korea also existed from 19th or 20th century?
Could you tell me again, sorry, about the question?
Sorry. For example, in Japan, in 19th century, the bishopric diocese in Japan were re-established. So in Korea, how about the Bishop Brugger came to Korea in 19th century. So at that time, bishop was sent from propaganda Fide or established the diocese.
Okay, so the Bishop Brugger was the first apostolic vicar in Korea. At the time, there is no diocese in Korea, so it's the first one sent by the propaganda Fide. But propaganda Fide just asked to missionary of MEP, parish missionaries, to take a charge in the Korean missions. So propaganda directly did not send the missionaries or bishops to Korea, just introduced the MEP to take a charge of the Korean missions.
Okay, I see. Just like in Japan. So okay. And another question I have, sorry, about the origin of Catholic mission in Korea. As far as my understanding, during the war between Korea and Toyotomi Hideyoshi, at the end of 16th century, the Spanish Jesuit Gregorio Céspedes landed in Korea and attempt to propagate the faith. It's not. How about the recent discussions about the origin of Catholic mission in Korea?
So there are some argument or the talking about when is the originate at the Catholic Church in Korea, but as you mentioned, the Jesuit priest Sebastian, I'm not sure the correct name.
No?
Yeah, he was only landed in Korea as the chaplain of the Japanese the armies. So he went to Korea to support the Japanese people. So he did not evangelize the Korean people. So we did not consider so his mission to Korea is not for the Korean people. That is for the Japanese soldiers to attack the Korea. So that's not our originality of the Korean Catholic Church. Thank you.
Okay, I see. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, so there's another question in the chatting chat. So there are some Korean Columba lay missionaries working in Philippines and in Hong Kong. Yes, I know some the Columba missionaries working in Philippines and Hong Kong. I think a few members from the lay missionaries from Korea, they are working with the in Philippines and Hong Kong. I know that we have some peoples. Yeah. Yes. All right.
If I may ask a question, I'd like, because a lot of the periods that all three of you covered, I mean, it's very brutal persecution, a time of brutal persecution too. And so it's amazing to hear how the Catholic faith, the Catholic communities survived, without missionaries, with hardly anything. I guess I'm curious, what did these people, local people, see in the Christian faith that allowed them to persist, to even embrace martyrdom?
Okay, so lay persons in Korea wanted to find a new religion, because at that time the Korean society was covered by the Confucianism. The Confucianism sometimes affected the negative side in Korean church, Korean society. So some scholars want to reform the society. So the religion of Western, the Catholicism, another way to reform the society. So they studied new religion as the ideology to reform the society. So scholars accessed the Catholicism at first to learn something from the Westerns. So that is the original, the purpose to have the contact with the Catholicism by the Korean scholars.
Yeah, and Father ARMADA, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cynthia. Actually, I would like to suggest something with regard to this forum, this symposium. Based on the talk of Cardinal Tagle that I remembered about this, you know that the Philippines has its own history of mission, Korea as well, and then Hong Kong, Indonesia, Japan. Oh, why don't we, let's say, collaborate more closely to each other? Let's just not share the historical account, but also let's do something together, whether it is about mission, collaboration of mission, or maybe collaboration of the education institution, or maybe collaboration of the priestly formation, something like that. I mean, we are close, but it seems to me that we are not so close. We keep sending missionaries to Hong Kong, to Taiwan, to Japan. But it seems to me that the mission is just their own interests. I mean, there is no somehow like a close contact between, let's say, the Catholic Church of Japan, of Indonesia, of Taiwan, of the Philippines, of Vietnam, etc. This is quite important, you know, that we come together as a Christian, as a Catholics, then let's share not just what we experienced from the past, but also, as you mentioned, what we can do for the future. This is my small suggestion to this symposium. Thank you. Yes, Prof. Antonio.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, okay. I fully agree with Father ARMADA. Yeah, your suggestion is brilliant. Yeah, and actually, this year, 2022, is the 50th anniversary of FABC, Federation of Asian Bishops Conference, and actually, and Cardinal Kim play a very important, very significant role in the establishment of the FABC. And actually, if FABC can consolidate a certain kind of the idea of the Father ARMADA, yeah, to build up a, for example, a missionary school, something similar institutes, it's very meaningful.
Yes, yes.
And actually, I myself, in July, I have my annual retreat, and my master is a priest, a Carmelite priest from Indonesia, Father Albert. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I think a lot of missionaries from Asian countries are working actively in other places. Yeah. So if they can consolidate together, and it will be more powerful and more significant in the world. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think maybe on that proposal, we
can propose to
contemplate and hopefully, hopefully among all our institutions with clergy and lay people, we can all work toward a new kind of collaboration in this new context, right? Since people are already, ideas are moving around. So I guess I do have to, I thank everyone, particularly our three panelists for a wonderful panel discussion and all the participants. I will have to yield the time to the next panel. So thank you very much. I really enjoyed and appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lucia.